There are over 6,000 asylum seekers in Scotland. Glasgow is housing more asylum seekers than any other council in the United Kingdom, a staggering 3,844 as of the end of June. That is 40% more than Birmingham. To be blunt but honest with the communities that we represent and that we serve, this cannot continue. The economic costs are considerable. £250 million a year to house asylum seekers in Scotland. £41,000 to house and support each and every one. Ignoring this problem will not make it go away. The protests that Mr Swinney condemned are not what any of us would like to see on Scotland's streets, but they are the product of the failure of politicians to address legitimate community concerns. And at the heart of this problem, not at this moment, at the heart of this problem are criminal gangs who bring in illegal immigrants into this country in small boats. In the year to June, nearly 90,000 asylum applications were made in the UK, and 50% of those arrived via irregular routes, the vast majority by boat, but others by lorry or shipping container. The First Minister and SNP ministers can no longer bury their head in the sand, because the negative effects of illegal immigration and the asylum hotels at the visible tip of that iceberg are very, very real. Now, during the course of the summer, I knocked on thousands of doors across Dumfriesshire, and time again, the issue of illegal immigration came up. It came up amongst the young, amongst the old, it came up amongst those living in small villages and in large towns. And it came up amongst those who are directly impacted by asylum hotels and those who have simply watched the small boats arriving on their televisions with an increasing sense of alarm. And the costs are not just financial. There are economic costs and there are social costs and there are opportunity costs too. Yes, we all want Scotland to be a welcome, open nation. I've had the privilege of living and working overseas. I know how important migration is for modern dynamic economies to attract global talent and in so doing create a country rich in diverse cultures and experience. But uncontrolled migration, or worse still, rampant illegal immigration, simply cannot be the sustained solution to any workforce challenge. And the SNP are playing a strange game of identity politics if they believe this to be true. As we see from Scottish local authorities, the financial burden on housing immigrants cannot be understated. In fact, SNP-run Glasgow has admitted as much itself. Susan Aitken says the debt-laden local authority faces a staggering £66 million overspend on homelessness. And now today, city chiefs fear a fresh influx of newly homeless refugees as the Home Office reduces the length of time people can stay in government accommodation. With Scotland having... I will give an intervention at that point.
Mr Cook-Stewart.
Thank you, Craig Hoy, for taking that intervention. And I welcome your measured tone that we have started this debate on. Language does indeed matter. However, does he recognise that it was in fact the last Conservative government that did deliberately put a hold on processing claims to allow people seeking asylum, and now that Labour have come into Westminster, they are processing those claims, and that has resulted in vast numbers being there, but then that has not been funded properly in order to enable people to move on in dignity. Does he recognise that?
Craig Hoy, and give you some of the time back.
I recognise that, and I also said at the outset that this was going to be an uncomfortable debate for parties that had recently been in government. I'm not apportioning blame to one party or another in respect of this, but where the SNP does have to recognise, but where the First Minister's chuntering away, but where the SNP has to recognise it has... I will give way to Mr Swinney.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Hoy for giving way. I think what Mr Hoy is doing in this debate is, while he is tacitly acknowledging the failure of the Conservative government to properly manage the asylum regime over many, many years in office, he is bringing this debate to Parliament to politically exploit this issue in a most disgusting fashion. And it embodies where the Conservative Party has found itself these days now.
Craig Hoy.
We can always rely on John Swinney to lower the tone. Mr Swinney, I would say that coming to this Parliament to reflect the views of reasonable people, the legitimate views of reasonable people in a representative democracy, I think it is scurrilous, Mr Swinney, for you to throw around that kind of language.
Mr Hoy,
having a debate
through the chair, Mr Hoy.
Now, Mr Swinney is shaking his head, pretending none of this is to do with him, but it is quite clear that here in Scotland, having a more liberal homelessness rules than in England, that Scottish councils now fear that thousands of potential asylum seekers will come to Scotland, where they will have a right to be housed that does not exist in Scotland. That is a very real risk, and the Minister is well aware of that. The SNP's approach is, by councils' own admission, crippling. It's forcing them... No, I won't. I don't have time. It is forcing them to prioritise the needs of those from elsewhere when Scots struggle to get a roof over their head. At the outset, I said this debate would be uncomfortable for those in government and those who were recently in government. And that means us recognising that the policy of housing asylum seekers, many who are in reality illegal immigrants in hotels, was the wrong decision. I don't have time. I won't have time. It was a decision taken by the last Conservative government, but that was in the eye of the COVID storm. But now we have to admit it was the wrong policy, even if it was well-intentioned. But we also have to recognise that things have got much worse as a result of Labour's failure to tackle the mounting immigration crisis. Rather than stopping the boats, Keir Starmer and Labour have allowed their numbers to swell. They systematically took apart the deterrent schemes put in place by the last Conservative administration. And in the year to June, Labour presided over a 17% increase in asylum applications over the previous year. But beyond these numbers, the picture is even more alarming because of the SNP's open-door rhetoric, which is adding to the pressures. Deputy Presiding Officer, Scots are seeing their services undermined and their life chances blighted. In 2023, there were 40,685 applications for homelessness and 33,619 households were assessed as homeless or threatened with homelessness in Scotland. So across the country, people will be understandably concerned when they see priority given to those coming from overseas. Deputy Presiding Officer, housing asylum seekers in hotels is not the solution to this problem. Tackling the causes of illegal immigration and processing those who are seeking to come here at source is, in effect, the only way to fix it. As I said last week, the use of asylum hotels has changed our communities and, in their view, not for the better. 5 years after the emergency use of hotels during the pandemic, the numbers have soared. In August 2020, there were 188 asylum seekers housed in hotels and bed and breakfast in Scotland. Today, this figure stands at over 1,500. The last Conservative administration committed to end the use of hotels, but sadly, this Labour government have comprehensively failed to do so. It is, I don't have time. It is unfair and wrong. I don't have time. It is unfair and wrong that we are still spending millions of pounds every day providing hotels to asylum seekers and illegal immigrants.
You need to
the communities I understand want action. The communities I speak with, want action from their governments. They understand that Britain should be a place to live, to work, to flourish, to put down roots, but not a hotel for those who have entered the country illegally.
Our words do matter here, and they matter to the communities that we serve and those who seek our protection. So my message is very, very clear. We must ensure Scotland continues to be a welcoming nation to those fleeing persecution, conflict or danger. The UK has a moral and international legal obligation to uphold the 1951 UN Refugee Convention and supporting 1967 Protocol. The UK was indeed a founding signatory to the Convention, which defines the term refugee and outlines the legal protection, rights and assistance that a refugee is entitled to receive. According to international law, everyone who satisfies that definition in the Convention is a refugee. Scotland has a long history of being a welcoming nation where refugees have been able to rebuild their lives. Successive generations of refugee communities have contributed to Scotland, to our economy and our society. We shouldn't now turn our backs on those who need our protection in response to those who do seek to cause division and fuel tensions. Presiding Officer, asylum is a reserved issue, and it is the UK Government which is responsible for asylum decision-making and the provision of asylum accommodation. The Scottish Government has repeatedly raised concerns about the impact of UK asylum policy on Scottish local authorities, devolved public services and people living in our communities. And as CoCab Stewart pointed out, it was the previous Conservative UK Government which introduced asylum hotels and caused a processing backlog in the UK asylum system. Over the past year, attempts by the current UK Government to speed up decision-making and clear that backlog has resulted in a larger than expected number of newly recognised refugees seeking support from local authorities. And the wording is important, Presiding Officer. It's newly recognised refugees that have gone through their process, not illegal immigrants or migrants. And that is where the danger is in the policies that we are seeing. So So I'm disappointed that the UK Government hasn't been able to work with the Scottish Government and indeed councils on the pressures within the current system. That has been further exacerbated by the recent reversal of the time that people seeking asylum are given to move on from asylum accommodation after receiving a positive destination on their asylum claim, again, not an illegal asylum seeker, because newly recognised refugees are entitled to housing support and other benefits. But we've long argued that 28 days is not sufficient enough to enable them to make those arrangements. Indeed, that's a position also held by the British Red Cross. Of course, the UK Government's policy to restrict people seeking asylum from working can also make finding a job extremely difficult once a decision has been made. Now, the Scottish Government recognises that Glasgow City Council in particular has come under significant pressure as a result of UK Government decision-making, and I've repeatedly called on Home Office ministers to meet with me alongside Glasgow City Council. Indeed, in April, the Scottish Refugee Council invited me to attend a round table along with the Council and UK Government, and we were disappointed that UK Government ministers didn't join us, where we collectively discussed what within our own responsibilities could be done to tackle the pressure. Now, Presiding Officer, in face of Russian aggression, we stood up with the people of Ukraine, helping more than 28,000 people flee war. And that was across this chamber, Presiding Officer. I wonder what the difference is that makes some people think that we shouldn't support people who flee war and persecution and abuse when they come from other countries. And I'm quite happy to take an intervention from
Very briefly, Craig Hoy.
I thank the Minister for giving way. In the previous debate, many of her colleagues talked about what an independent Scotland would look like. If an independent Scotland had a similar problem of illegal immigration, how would this Minister tackle it?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, every country needs an asylum policy, but what we wouldn't allow is a backlog of claims to build up, and what we wouldn't have is a system where we actually didn't allow migration into our country for when we did need people into our country as well, both responsible morally and economically, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, can I end by asking the Chamber to join with me today in rejecting the divisive, dehumanising rhetoric in favour of delivering our moral and legal duties of protection and building a strong, resilient community?
Thank you. We are here today debating asylum and migration, but let's be clear, this debate has been framed by dog whistles, distortions and dangerous rhetoric from the Conservatives and others. I will not stand by while human beings are dehumanised, scapegoated and treated as though they are less than. Because no one is illegal. What is illegal, what is shameful, is the stripping away of rights, the deliberate spreading of misinformation and the whipping up of hatred by politicians and parts of the media. They are fueling the fire of racism and fascism in our communities. And this situation has been created by design. Not by those seeking safety, but by those who would rather manufacture enemies than face up to the real problems. The threat to our country arrives not in small boats. It arrives in private yachts and jets. The Conservatives come here with their hate-filled rhetoric, yet it was they who closed the route to come here safely. They are the proud party of empire, but empire has consequences. You cannot invade over 170 countries, subjugate millions to colonial rule, then feign outrage when people seek safety, family and community in Britain. Our history matters. The illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003 destabilised an entire region. Without our greed for oil, many would never have been forced to flee in the first place. We bombed Libya and left it a failed state. British foreign policy continues to create the very displacement the Conservatives now cynically exploit for political gain. And cynicism runs deep. The decision to house asylum seekers in hotels was not about care or compassion. It was about lining the pockets of Tory donors during COVID while stoking public resentment. It backfired. They lost in a landslide. But instead of learning, they doubled down, exploiting the most marginalised to divide society even further. And we see the consequences. In Falkirk, a brick was hurled through the window of a hotel housing asylum seekers. That's not mindless vandalism. That's intimidation. It's racism. And it was fuelled by the lies and hatred peddled in politics and the press. I've seen firsthand some of the toxicity at anti-migrant protests in Aberdeen and West Hill. Anti-migrant protests are not about safety. They are about hate, and hate kills. Scotland must choose another path. International law places on us legal obligation to provide sanctuary. But beyond that, there is a deeper moral duty, the duty to treat people with dignity, with compassion, and with humanity. That means the right to work, the right to contribute, the right to live in communities, not warehoused in ghettos or trapped in hostile conditions. Asylum seekers are not a burden. They are our neighbours, our future colleagues, our friends. So let's be honest about the real issues. Small boats are not the problem. Refugees are not the problem. The problem is a grotesquely unequal economic system that privileges the wealthy elite while ordinary people, whether born here or newly arrived, struggle to make ends meet. The answers do not lie in violent racism or in scapegoating those who seek safety. The answers lie in solidarity, in dismantling inequality, in building a society where everyone belongs and everyone can flourish. So I say to the Conservatives, stop scapegoating the marginalised. Stop using asylum seekers as a distraction from your failures. Stop peddling the dangerous lie that migration is a threat. Scotland has a proud tradition of welcome. Let us honour that tradition, not just in words, but in action, by treating asylum seekers with the dignity and respect every human being deserves.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This afternoon we have heard that local authorities are struggling to house the surging number of asylum seekers in Scotland. Communities, especially in my own region of central Scotland, are feeling the consequences and tensions are rising. This debate is important because, however difficult, we have a duty to confront the concerns of our constituents. We can't simply dismiss them. In Falkirk, the rape of a 15-year-old girl in October 2023 by an asylum seeker who entered the UK illegally has left the community shaken. As part of the perpetrator's defence, his lawyer mentioned cultural differences and language barriers being part of the reason that he did not understand his action, but did not say that that was an excuse for the crime that was committed. Now, irrespective, for the people that I represent, the plain fact is this: a young girl was attacked by someone who illegally entered the UK. Protests have taken place outside migrant hotels in my region. The use of hotels have become a flashpoint, fuelling anger and disgust. But we can't brand everyone who raises concerns as racists. We as politicians must listen. I certainly will.
Minister, briefly.
The crime that you describe is absolutely disgusting and appalling, and I would totally condemn that. And she then goes on to say that people who are raising concerns cannot be tarnished or categorised. But she also accepts that we cannot hold those that are seeking, fleeing from war and persecution, and asylum seekers and refugees with the same brush either, and that we need to be very careful to use our positions of leadership to actually calm those tensions. Can she give me an example of how the Conservatives are doing that?
Megan Gallagher, I can give you the time back.
We are trying to have a grown-up debate in the Scottish Parliament this afternoon. The public are not extremists. They're asking fair questions. And what we are trying to do is bring the debate here in the Chamber to talk about the wider issues surrounding asylum seeker hotels and indeed the issues that could alleviate some of the tensions, such as housing, which I will get onto in a little while. But one of the banners at the protest, and this is the point that I'm going on to, Minister, it read, "Migrants adored, pensioners ignored." That sentiment is completely blunt, but it captures what I believe is how many people are feeling right now in Scotland. Immigration pressures, that's both legal and illegal, expose the failures in housing, healthcare and public services. Too many hard-working people who live and work in Scotland are feeling ignored by governments, and I'm saying that in a plural context. who have completely failed to get a grip on this issue. I think we also need to look at the demographics of who is arriving here in Scotland. Across the UK, 62% of asylum claims are from adult males, compared to just 21% of adult females. For small boat arrivals, the imbalance is even greater. Around 75% are adult men, while only 10% are children. These are not families fleeing together. They are overwhelmingly single men of working age. So people do see this, they do see the demographics, and they wonder why women and children are not being prioritised as part of the asylum system. Meanwhile, here in Scotland, over 1,500 asylum seekers are being housed in hotels, almost a quarter of those in the system. Across the UK, the number of hotels still stands at more than 32,000, despite repeated promises to reduce it. No, I won't, because I'm in my last couple of seconds. Presiding Officer, housing is central to the debate. Scotland's housing emergency wasn't created overnight. It is the product of decades of failure to build enough homes. We see that through the homelessness applications. We see that through the thousands of Scots who are trapped on social waiting lists. Yet asylum seekers are being placed in hotels while local families wait. The solution is straightforward. If we get a grip of the housing emergency, if we build more homes, then we will be able to look at immigration in a new light. But until we get a grip of that situation, Presiding Officer, I fear that we will still have tensions here in Scotland because we're not addressing the big issues that matter in this country.
And we are in a position that we can control our own borders. We can attract the skills and professions that we need, be that doctors, dentists or nurses, all that we have a shortage of. The problem we have, and what fellow Scots are angry about, is illegal migration. The First Minister likes to remind us that we are a country that follows the rule of law at every opportunity. Yes, I will give way. Minister, briefly.
Just in the spirit of the fact that language matters, would he accept that there is no such thing as illegal migration due to the 1951 Convention, which this country is signed up to, and he would be better advised to use the language that is appropriate, which would be regular and irregular routes?
Douglas Lumsden. I think if people are coming here illegally, then it is illegal migration. I think that's what the term that everyone accepts. Because when it comes to illegal migration, the government is quite happy to look the other way and welcome with open arms these individuals who have dangerously entered the country illegally. The SNP seem genuinely confused about what is legal and what is illegal. And let me try and spell it out for the members in this chamber. Applying for a visa, being granted the visa, bringing your skills to the UK and contributing to our economy is perfectly legal and welcome. Crossing the channel in a small boat, illegal. Not only that, it's dangerous, life-threatening and enables criminals. We should not be welcoming people into this country that cross the channel illegally. If the SNP can't understand that, then it proves that they are out of touch with communities right across Scotland who are angry. I will give way. Very briefly, Stephen Kerr.
Okay. I think that's the whole point. I mean, I asked a question last week at GQ's about homelessness in Glasgow and pointed out the issues surrounding refugee numbers or asylum seekers, call them what you will. The Minister that was replying said I should be ashamed of myself for asking the question. Isn't that how out of touch the SNP are with the ordinary people of Scotland?
Douglas
they
Lumsden.
Don't share their concerns.
Yeah, no, Douglas Lumsden. Yeah. Stephen Kerr is right. You know, whether we like this to talk about this or not, this is real concerns from people outside. And, you know, we are here as a parliament. We have to represent the views of all those people also. You know, there is no real deterrent in this country. The Rwanda scheme, maybe it wasn't perfect, maybe it wasn't liked by everyone, but it would have been a start. But instead, we have Labour and SNP sending out all the wrong signals. We shouldn't be encouraging illegal immigrants to cross the channel in dinghies, allegedly fleeing persecution, conflict or danger from war-torn France. We simply cannot cope. The government needs to understand that the strain that communities are under due to high levels of illegal migration. And, you know, Scots struggle to get appointments at dentists, GPs, NHS waiting lists have spiralled out of control. We have a housing emergency and people can't get into social housing. The list of pressure goes on. And Jamie Green's right, these pressures did exist before. But if members in here think that illegal immigration is not playing a part in all of this, then they are deluded. and hard-working families that have paid into the state for their whole lives are being forgotten about. That is the view of people out there. People see that our public services are under strain. Local councils that are already facing a funding crisis due to years of SNP austerity are left to pick up the tab for the SNP's open door policy. The SNP government need to listen to our communities, listen to our hard-working Scots who are angry because they are paying more and getting less.
Mr McPherson.
When the internet became more prevalent and social media emerged, many of us thought it would help bring us closer together as human beings, both here and around the world. Unfortunately, on many occasions, and we're seeing a lot of this now in our communities, such technology is being used by bad faith actors to drive wedges between communities and create fear. Because fear of immigration has always caused much more damage than any sort of immigration ever could. People think of the bad examples, the minority of stories where there has been a situation or a case that has negatively affected a community and focus on that, rather than amplifying and considering the huge and massively positive contribution that thousands of individuals have made to other countries they've gone to throughout the pages of history and in recent times. And let's also remember that a lot of the people who are coming to our shores and other parts of Europe are moving from places that we bear responsibility for damaging: Iraq, Afghanistan, and many others. And let us think, in the shoes of those who come here, how it must feel to leave somewhere, to travel across continents, and then arrive and be subject to a system that is often extremely difficult for them to cope with, mentally and psychologically. I recognise and respect that immigration is an important issue for my constituents and elsewhere in Scotland. And it's something I've thought about deeply, particularly as MSP for Leith, a port, an area that has welcomed people for decades, whether it was the Irish in the 19th century, Italians, Indians and Pakistanis in the 20th, more recently from Poland and Ukraine and America and China and elsewhere, all of whom have added to our community and also adopted a sense of being proudly Scottish. Let us be clear that the vast majority of people who come here are very positive contributors. That is a fact. Economically, they are net contributors, and socially, they bring something to our communities, creating multicultural and intercultural diversity, with minorities adding to a strong and inclusive collective embrace of Scottish culture.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to recognise the context for this debate. The UK still receives a small number of refugees compared with many other countries. 72% of refugees live in countries that neighbour their country of origin. And the UK hosts only around 1% of the world's refugees. And the truth is, they make a huge contribution to this country, both economically and socially. As for the numbers, asylum applications peaked in 2002 at around 84,000 a year. In 2024, the number was around 84,000 in the year. Now, the figures so far for 2025 do show a slight increase, still significantly fewer than many other European countries, and the current peak is similar to previous high points. And that's nothing to be surprised at, given the growth in conflict and economic or climate stress around the world. Most claims are legitimate. They are found to deserve and need the right to stay here. And the backlog, as others have mentioned, is entirely the result of deliberate choices by successive governments. As for housing, what broke the UK's housing system is the long-term decline in socially rented housing and its replacement by a rapacious, exploitative private rented sector. Asylum seekers are not to blame for the lack of investment in affordable housing. They're not to blame for landlords hiking rent. They're not to blame for the pressure on our public services. These are the results of choices made by successive UK governments. Now, the explicit hostile environment policy of the UK government began around 2012, and anti-immigrant and racist sentiment peaked with Brexit. But even then, even at that stage, what we're seeing now might have seemed unthinkable. Openly racist, ethno-nationalist ideology is being mainstreamed. Members of Parliament openly discussing mass deportation and questioning whether black and brown people can ever be considered British or English. The UK Shadow Justice Secretary quite content to be photographed in the company of a founder member of Combat 18, a neo-Nazi terror group. And a man who proudly showed the world a Nazi salute is now using the social media platform he bought not only to tolerate explicit far-right racist and conspiracy content, but actively paying people to generate it. And despite years, even decades of evidence from countries right around the world, the political parties that claim the centre ground of UK politics are doing nothing to challenge the profoundly dishonest, racist grifters of the far right. Instead, they are signalling to the electorate that the priorities of people like Farage and Robinson are the right ones. Aping the far right is obviously wrong in principle, but it will also never work. These people already have wall-to-wall media coverage for their hateful agenda, but the current UK government is risking giving them the political power to demolish our human rights, to treat immigrants and asylum seekers as subhuman, all while slashing public services even more severely and handing what's left of the economy to the super-rich. We need to be clear-eyed about the dire threat that's resulted from UK government after government dancing to the far right's tune and allowing both traditional and social media to become propaganda machines for extremism. I want to end, Presiding Officer, by saying there is still reason for optimism. Even after decades of anti-asylum propaganda, in every community you can find people giving their time, their energy and their resources to support asylum seekers, to show that the instinct to reach out and help those who need it is a basic part of human nature. It is strong. We need governments and politicians who share that instinct, who will express it and who will explicitly challenge and oppose the racism of the far right.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We have heard this afternoon of the failings of the UK Home Office policies, yet this must not undermine our continuing moral and legal commitment to refugees and people seeking asylum. I am deeply concerned of some of the rhetoric being used across the UK, which of course should have no place in our society. No one should have to fear that they will be targeted just for being who they are, and it is critical that every citizen feels safe and welcome in our communities. As the Cabinet Secretary made clear in her opening remarks, we all have a responsibility to be mindful of the language we use. Scotland's Parliament can choose to reject the deliberate use of divisive and inaccurate language, which does nothing to help to address community concerns or the impact of austerity. And it has been disappointing to hear the echoing of divisive language being uttered in this chamber, said, however, politely, but still inflammatory. Speaking as a local MSP, Glasgow Kelvin, I have the great honour to represent one of the most diverse constituencies in Scotland. And I understand, of course I do, that people feel left behind after a decade of austerity, after a decade of mismanagement. And Westminster is literally working against them. However, I have also had the pleasure of visiting so many local grassroots community groups that are bringing people together to share conversations, to share food, to share culture, and to get to know each other, learning that we actually have more in common than what divides us. And Scots, new Scots, have the same hopes, the same dreams, and their stories and laughter are weaving the very fabric of our rich, diverse, welcoming nation. I will take an intervention.
Briefly, Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. Does the Minister also recall the way in which a community in another part of Glasgow, at Kenmure Street, rose up in opposition to the violence of the Home Office heavies and protected their asylum-seeking neighbours. Does she share my pride in that kind of concern about the immigration issues in our society?
Minister.
I absolutely accept and acknowledge that the majority of people in Scotland will rise up and protect everyone within our communities. However, in direct contrast, some of the pressures arising from the UK's asylum system are a consequence of overly restrictive policies, such as the right to work, and this prevents people from contributing to our economy or indeed supporting themselves. And it erodes their skills and experiencing, minimising opportunities for integration. And I welcome the fact that that was also raised by Mr Green and Mr Dornan. Now, sadly, and to our increasing frustration, asylum and immigration decisions making is reserved to the UK Government. And I welcome Mr Sweeney's support to work with us to pursue the right to work and safe, regular routes and the expansion of visas. Presiding officer, I am deeply concerned that asylum hotels are now being turned into targets of the far right for the safety of all. We need the move-on period to be extended back to 56 days. I'm conscious of my time. Furthermore, local authorities need to be properly funded for the work they do where the pressures are identified, such as the case in Glasgow City Council. And we need the UK Government to recognise the impact on public services and engage with us to develop those solutions.